The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a small city. Thousands of seats filled the curved walls, each one designed for a different alien species. Some seats held creatures with tentacles, others had beings made of crystal, and many more housed aliens that breathed different gases or needed special temperatures. The noise was incredible. Clicking, humming, growling, and sounds that human ears couldn't even understand properly. But today, something was different. One section of seats sat completely empty. For the first time in 200 years, humanity had no voice in this room. Chancellor Crixon stood at the center podium, his purple skin gleaming under the bright lights. He was Veltar, a species that looked somewhat like tall, thin humans but with 4 arms and eyes that glowed yellow. The Veltar had been part of the council for over 1,000 years, and they thought this gave them the right to make decisions for everyone else. "Fellow council members," Crixon announced, his voice carrying clearly through the translation devices, "today marks a new beginning for our galaxy. We have removed the most dangerous element from our peaceful discussions." Cheers and approval sounds came from many of the alien delegates. The Althari, who looked like walking flower gardens, rustled their petal-like appendages in agreement. The Genti, beings made of living crystal, chimed their support with musical tones. "The humans," Crixon continued, "have shown themselves to be too violent, too unpredictable for civilized society. Their constant military expansion, their refusal to share their technologies, their aggressive nature, all of this threatens the peace we have worked so hard to build." More cheers filled the hall. Many species nodded or made their own versions of agreement. The humans had always been different from the other council races. They were young, only joining the galactic community 300 years ago, and they seemed to always be preparing for war. While other species talked about peace and cooperation, humans built bigger ships and stronger weapons. "From this day forward," the Chancellor declared, "humanity is banned from all council meetings, all joint projects, and all cooperative agreements. Let them learn what it means to be alone in the galaxy." The vote had been taken 3 days earlier, and it wasn't even close. Out of the 847 species that made up the council, 798 had voted to exclude humanity. Only 23 species had voted against the ban, and 26 had abstained. It was the largest agreement the council had seen in decades. On the other side of the galaxy, on the human colony world of New Sol, Ambassador Taemin sat in his office reading the official notice. The holographic document floated in front of his desk, the council's seal glowing at the top. His face showed no emotion, but his hands were clenched into fists. "Sir?" Sora, his aide, stood in the doorway. She was young, maybe 25, with short black hair and worried eyes. "The other ambassadors are asking what our response will be." Taemin looked up from the document. He had been humanity's voice in the council for 15 years. He had spent countless hours trying to build bridges between his species and the aliens. He had argued for cooperation, for understanding, for patience. And this was what it had gotten him. "Tell them," he said quietly, "that humanity has received their message loud and clear." Sora waited for more, but Taemin had already turned, back to the holographic notice. She could see the anger in his posture, the way his shoulders were set. She had never seen him like this before. "Should I prepare a formal response, sir?" "No," Taemin said without looking up. "No response at all." Meanwhile, in a secure facility deep underground on Earth, Jinho was staring at a very different kind of display. The room around him was filled with screens showing star maps, energy readings, and data streams that most people wouldn't understand. Jinho was the head of human intelligence, and right now he was looking at something that made his blood run cold. "How long have we been tracking these signatures?" he asked the technician beside him. 18 months, sir," the woman replied. "They started at the galactic rim and they're moving inward, slowly but steadily." The display showed dots of light moving across a map of their galaxy. To most people it would look like normal stellar activity. But Jinho knew better. These weren't stars being born or dying. These were something else entirely. "Have any of the council species reported similar readings?" "We've tried to share the data, sir. But after we sent the reports, the Council Science Committee said our equipment must be malfunctioning. They said these were just normal cosmic events. Jin-Ho rubbed his temples. The headaches had been getting worse lately, especially since the Council had started talking about excluding humanity. It was as if everyone had decided that humans were paranoid, warmongering, and couldn't be trusted to understand what they were seeing. "Get me Mi-young," he said. "I need her analysis updated." Dr. Mi-young had been studying these energy signatures for 8 months. As humanity's top expert on alien biology and unknown life forms, she was one of the few people who understood what they might be facing. Her laboratory was 3 floors down from Jin-Ho's office, hidden even deeper in the earth. When Jin-Ho arrived, he found Mi-young hunched over a complex biological scanner. Samples from the outer rim, debris that had been collected by human scout ships, were spread across her workbench. "Tell me you have good news," Jin-Ho said. Mi-young looked up, and Jin-Ho could see the fear in her eyes. "It's not good news, Jin-Ho. It's the worst possible news." She gestured to the scanner display. The image showed what looked like living tissue, but tissue unlike anything that had ever evolved naturally. It was part organic, part machine, and completely alien. "This came from the Kepler 442 system," Mi-young said. "The system that went dark 6 months ago. The Council said it was a stellar collapse, but look at this." The tissue sample pulsed with its own light. Under magnification, Jin-Ho could see tiny structures that looked almost like circuitry, but made of living cells. "This isn't from any known species," Mi-young continued. "And it's not natural evolution either. This is something that was designed, built, created for a specific purpose." "What purpose?" Mi-young was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Consumption. This tissue is designed to break down and absorb other biological material. It doesn't just kill, it converts everything it touches into more of itself." Jin-Ho felt the room spin slightly. "How much material are we talking about?" "Based on the energy signatures we've been tracking, enough to consume entire worlds." Back on New Seoul, Ambassador Taemin was meeting with other human officials. The Kyoer conference room was full of worried faces. Governors from the outer colonies, military commanders, and scientists. Everyone had heard about the Council's decision, and everyone wanted to know what humanity would do next. "The Council has made their position clear," Taemin said. "They don't want us involved in galactic affairs. They think we're too dangerous, too aggressive." General Park, the head of Colonial Defense, leaned forward. "What about our trade agreements, our joint research projects, the mutual defense pacts?" "All canceled," Taemin replied. "Every single one. We're completely cut off from official council activities." "This is insane," said Governor Kim from the Taoseti colonies. "We've been part of the galactic community for 3 centuries. We've contributed to science, to culture, to keeping the peace. How can they just throw all of that away?" Taemin had been asking himself the same question. The official reason was that humanity had been expanding its military too rapidly and refusing to share certain technologies with other species. But the real reason, he suspected, was simpler. Humanity made the other species uncomfortable. Humans were different from most galactic species. While others had developed slowly, peacefully over millions of years, humanity had gone from barely understanding fire to traveling between stars in just a few thousand years. They were aggressive, curious, and constantly pushing boundaries. To species that valued stability and tradition, humans seemed dangerous and unpredictable. "What about our intelligence reports?" asked Dr. Yang, the head of the Colonial Science Council. "The energy signatures from the outer rim, the systems that have gone dark?" Taemin's expression darkened. "The Council has classified all of that as human propaganda designed to create fear and justify military expansion." The room fell silent. Everyone there knew about the strange readings, the missing systems, the growing sense that something was very wrong at the edges of their galaxy. The fact that the Council refused to listen made everything worse. "Sir?" Sora entered the room quietly, carrying a secure communication device. "Priority message from Earth. It's marked urgent." Taemin took the device and activated it. Jin-Ho's face appeared on the screen, and his expression was grim. Taemin, we have confirmation. The signatures we've been tracking, they're not natural phenomena. Mi-young has analyzed samples from the outer rim, and we're looking at some kind of consumption-based life form, something that converts other biological matter into itself. The room was completely quiet now. Every person there understood what this meant. How long do we have? Taemin asked. Based on their current rate of movement? Maybe 6 months before they reach the first major population centers, a year before they get to the Council core worlds. Taemin nodded slowly. And the Council? Still refuses to acknowledge. Admiral Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the battleship Seoul's Thunder, watching as thousands of ships moved through space around him. The sight was incredible, the largest gathering of human military vessels in history, all of them running in complete communication silence. No broadcasts, no signals, no messages that could be intercepted by alien listening posts. The ships came from every human colony and outpost. Massive battle cruisers from the core worlds, fast attack vessels from the outer rim colonies, and support ships from the industrial systems. All of them had received the same orders: gather, prepare, and wait. Status report, Hyunwoo said quietly to his communications officer. All fleets report ready, sir. Complete blackout protocols are in effect. As far as the rest of the galaxy knows, human military activity has returned to normal levels. Hyunwoo nodded. The deception was working perfectly. While the Council species celebrated their victory over humanity, human forces were mobilizing on a scale that would have terrified them. But they weren't looking. They had decided humans were no longer their concern. Any word from the construction teams? Project Sentinel is ahead of schedule, sir. Engineer Da-eun reports that the first platforms will be online within 2 weeks. The asteroid belt of the Ross 128 system. Da-eun was indeed ahead of schedule. Around her, hundreds of construction ships worked to complete the largest defensive installation humanity had ever built. The platform looked like a small city floating in space, covered with weapons, shields, and sensor arrays. Woo-jin, how are the new weapon systems testing? She called out over the construction site's communication system. Woo-jin was floating near the main weapons array, his spacesuit's lights illuminating the massive cannon he was inspecting. Better than expected, he replied. The power output is 30% higher than our original calculations. These things should punch right through whatever shielding technology we're going to face. Da-eun allowed herself a small smile. The weapons Woo-jin was installing weren't based on any technology the Council had ever seen. They had been developed, specifically for the threat they knew was coming, using principles that human scientists had discovered but never shared with their alien colleagues. How many more platforms can we complete in the next month? If we keep working at this pace, maybe 20, enough to protect our most important systems but not enough to cover everything. Da-eun nodded grimly. They were building as fast as they could, but time was running out. The energy signatures from the galactic rim were moving closer every day. On the other side of human space, the first real proof of what they were facing was about to reveal itself. The Althari system had been one of the most beautiful in the galaxy. 3 worlds covered with the flower-like beings who had evolved from plant life rather than animal life. Their cities looked like gardens, with buildings that grew rather than being constructed. The Althari had been one of the most vocal supporters of excluding humanity from the Council. Commander Lee was watching from the bridge of the stealth ship Quiet Storm as something emerged from the darkness between stars. The ship's advanced sensors, hidden behind layers of stealth technology, recorded everything that happened next. What came out of deep space wasn't a ship in any sense that most species would understand. It was more like a living moon, covered in what looked like organic armor and pulsing with its own light. Behind it came smaller creatures, each one the size of a human battleship, moving with the fluid grace of sea creatures. "My God," whispered the sensor operator. "What are those things?" Lee didn't answer immediately. He was too busy watching as the creatures descended on the first Althari world like a plague. The planet's defenses, energy shields and defensive satellites that had protected the system for centuries, might as well have been made of paper. The smaller creatures landed on the planet's surface and began to spread. Within hours, the beautiful garden cities were changing, becoming something else. The organic architecture that the Althari had been so proud of was being consumed and converted into structures that pulsed with alien life. "Sir," the communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet." The main screen filled with the image of an Althari leader, its flower-like head wilted with terror. Behind it, Lee could see the walls of what had once been a government building, but the walls were moving now, covered with the same organic material they had seen in Mi Young's laboratory. "To anyone who can hear this," the Althari gasped, "we are under attack. The invaders are not destroying our cities. They are changing them. They are changing us. Our people are being absorbed, converted into something else. Please, if anyone receives this message, stay away. Do not come here. Do not." The transmission cut off suddenly. The screen showed only static. "Keep recording," Lee ordered. "Document everything. The people back home need to see this." Over the next 3 days, they watched as the entire Althari system was consumed. The beautiful garden worlds became something out of a nightmare, covered with structures that looked like they were made from living tissue. The space around the planets filled with more of the creatures, growing and multiplying as they fed on what they had conquered. On the third day, the largest creature, the one that looked like a living moon, turned toward deep space and began to move again. Behind it followed a fleet that was 3 times larger than what had arrived. The quiet storm followed at a safe distance, transmitting everything back to human command through encrypted channels. What they saw next confirmed humanity's worst fears. The creatures moved to the Genthi system next. The Genthi were beings made of living crystal, and their worlds were some of the most beautiful in the galaxy. Cities that looked like they were carved from gems, powered by the natural resonance of the crystal beings themselves. The Genthi had also voted to exclude humanity from the Council, claiming that human aggression was incompatible with their peaceful nature. The attack on the Genthi worlds was even more horrifying than what had happened to the Althari. The organic creatures that had consumed the garden world seemed to adapt and evolve as they encountered the crystal beings. Within hours of landing, they had developed the ability to break down and absorb crystalline matter, the beautiful gem. Cities became twisted structures that were part organic, part crystal, and completely alien. The Genthi themselves, beings who had existed for millions of years, were absorbed and converted into something that served the invaders. Commander Lee watched it all, recording every moment. When he finally returned to human space, the data he carried would change everything. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, the first signs of trouble were being ignored. Chancellor Crixon was reviewing the weekly reports when his aide mentioned that they had lost contact with 2 systems at Bior, the Galactic Rim. "Lost contact?" the Chancellor asked absently, not looking up from his work. "Yes, sir. The Althari system and the Genthi system have gone completely dark. No communications, no trade signals, nothing." Crixon finally looked up. "Probably some kind of technical problem. Or maybe they're having internal political issues. You know how these younger species can be." The aide looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the Genthi have been part of the Council for over 2 million years. They're hardly a young species." "Then it's a technical problem," Crixon said firmly. "Send a message to the nearest Council patrol. Have them check on both systems when they have time." What the Chancellor didn't know was that the nearest Council patrol had been destroyed 3 days earlier when they tried to investigate the Althari system. The organic creatures had added Council ship technology to their growing arsenal. Meanwhile, in the human intelligence facility on Earth, Jin Ho was receiving reports that made his blood run cold. Confirmed consumption of 2 major systems, Hidao told the assembled military leaders on the screen. Complete conversion of all biological and technological material. Estimated enemy fleet strength has increased by 300%. Admiral Hyunwoo's face was grim on the communication screen. "How long until they reach the next population centers?" "At their current rate of expansion, maybe 4 months. And every system they take makes them stronger." "What about the Council? Are they responding to the threat yet?" Jin Ho shook his head. "They're treating the lost systems as technical failures or internal problems. Chancellor Crixon has refused to acknowledge that there's any external threat. General Park leaned forward. What about our own preparations? Are we ready if they turn toward human space? The first Sentinel platforms are online, Jinho replied. Engineer Dayun has 20 installations completed, with more coming online. Every week, Wujin's weapon systems are testing beyond expectations. And our fleet readiness? Admiral Hyun Woo answered that question. Every human ship is ready for combat. We've been drilling constantly, running silent exercises, preparing for what's coming. But I have to be honest, if these creatures can consume entire council systems in a matter of days, I'm not sure we have enough firepower to stop them. The yacht. Meeting continued for hours, with reports from across human space. Every colony was preparing, every military unit was ready, every research facility was working on ways to fight an enemy that consumed everything it touched. But as the reports came in, one thing became very clear. Humanity was alone. The species. The attack on Council space began at dawn on what would later be called Black Tuesday, though no one who lived through it would ever forget the date. 7 different Council systems were hit simultaneously. The creatures that intelligence reports were now calling Devourers had learned from their previous attacks. They no longer took days to consume a world. Now they could do it in hours. In the Luna Base Command Center, deep beneath the moon's surface, Kang Ho watched the reports come. And with growing horror, as humanity's chief military strategist, he had seen plenty of war simulations and battle reports, but nothing had prepared him for the scale of destruction he was witnessing. Report from the Veltar Home System, announced Ye Jin, the head of Xenological Warfare, from her position at the main intelligence console. Chancellor Crixon's homeworld has gone dark. Complete loss of communication in under 6 hours. Kang Ho closed his eyes for a moment. The Veltar had been one of the most powerful species in the Council, with a fleet that numbered in the thousands and defensive systems that had protected their worlds for millennia. If the Devourers could destroy them in 6 hours, no Council species was safe. What about their military response, he asked. Minimal resistance recorded. The Veltar fleet attempted to engage the Devourers in orbit, but their weapons appear to have no significant effect. The enemy ships absorbed the energy from Veltar weapons and used it to power their own systems. The main display showed a tactical map of the galaxy, with red zones marking systems that had gone dark. What had started as a few dots at the outer rim had become a spreading stain that covered nearly a quarter of the galaxy's populated region. Status of Council military forces? Kang Ho asked. Ye Jin pulled up another display. Complete chaos. Most Council species are trying to defend their own home systems. There's no coordination, no unified response. Some fleets are retreating to heavily defended core worlds. Others are attempting individual counterattacks. And how effective are these counterattacks? Completely ineffective. The Devourers seem to adapt to whatever weapons are used against them. Energy weapons just feed their power systems. Kinetic weapons are absorbed and converted into more Devourer material. Even nuclear weapons only seem to provide them with raw matter for expansion. Kang Ho stared at the spreading red stain on the galactic map. Each red dot represented billions of lives, entire civilizations that had existed for millions of years, now consumed and converted into something alien and hostile. What about evacuation efforts? Some species are trying to evacuate their populations, but there's nowhere to go. The Devourers are moving too fast, and they seem to be targeting the most populated systems first. In another part of the base, Admiral Hyunwoo was receiving increasingly desperate communications from across Council space. His communication officer, a young lieutenant named Park, was struggling to keep up with all the incoming messages. Sir, we have another priority message from Chancellor Crixon, Lieutenant Park announced. Put it through, Hyunwoo replied. The screen filled with the image of the Veltar Chancellor, but he looked nothing like the proud, arrogant leader who had announced humanity's exclusion from the Council just months earlier. His purple skin was pale, and his forearms trembled as he spoke. To any human forces receiving this transmission, Crixon said, his voice breaking, we formally request immediate military assistance. Our home system is under attack by an unknown enemy force. Our fleet has been destroyed, our defenses have failed. We were wrong about the threat reports. We were wrong about everything. The transmission was cut short by static and interference. When it cleared, they could see fires burning in the background behind where the Chancellor had been standing. Please, Crixon continued. We know we voted to exclude humanity from the Council. We know we treated your species unfairly, but billions of lives are at stake. We're begging you, please help us. The transmission ended abruptly. Lieutenant Park looked up at Admiral Hyunwoo expectantly. Sir, should I prepare a response? Hyunwoo was quiet for a long moment, staring at the blank screen where the Chancellor's desperate face had been. Finally, he spoke. No response. The Council made it very clear that they don't want to hear from humanity. But sir, no response, Lieutenant. That's an order. Similar scenes were playing out across human space as desperate messages poured in from species that had voted to exclude humanity from galactic affairs. The proud Althari, whose representatives had called humans violent primitives, now begged for military support. The Genthi, who had claimed that human aggression was incompatible with galactic peace, sent increasingly frantic pleas for assistance. Each message was received, recorded, and filed away without response. On New Sol, Ambassador Taemin was dealing with a different kind of desperation. His office had been flooded with communications from former colleagues, alien diplomats who had worked alongside humans for decades before the exclusion vote. Hai Wan, who had served as humanity's cultural liaison, was particularly torn by the messages she was receiving. She had developed genuine friendships with diplomats from dozens of species over her 20 years of service. Taemin, she said as she entered his office. I just received a message from diplomat Zerthala of the Kethari. She's trapped on a refugee ship with the last survivors of her species. She's begging for sanctuary on human worlds. Taemin looked up from his desk where dozens of similar messages were displayed. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. But Taemin, these are people we worked with for decades. Zerthala helped design the cultural exchange programs that brought human art to dozens of worlds. We can't just ignore them. The Council voted to exclude humanity from all cooperative agreements. Taemin replied coldly. That includes refugee assistance. They wanted us out of galactic affairs. Well, now we're out. Haewon stared at him in shock. You can't be serious. We're talking about letting entire species go extinct because of politics. I'm not the one who made it about politics, Taemin said. The Council did that when they decided humanity was too dangerous to participate in civilized discourse. Before Haewon could respond, Sora entered the office carrying an emergency communication device, sir, she said urgently. Priority message from Earth. It's marked with the highest security classification. Taemin activated the device and Jinho's face appeared on the screen. The intelligence chief looked like he hadn't slept in days. Taemin, the situation is accelerating beyond our worst projections. The Devourers have consumed over 60 major systems in the past week. They're not just growing, they're learning and adapting at an incredible rate. How long until they reach the Council core worlds? Taemin asked. At their current expansion rate, 3 weeks, maybe less. And there's something else. They're heading directly for Council Prime. Council Prime was the capital world of the Galactic Council, home to over 50 billion beings from hundreds of different species. It was the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, protected by the combined fleets of the most powerful Council races. What about the Council's response? Taemin asked. Jinho's expression was grim. They're finally acknowledging the threat, but it's too late for coordinated resistance. Most species are focusing on defending their own worlds. The few that are trying to mount a unified defense don't have compatible technologies or tactics. And they're still not asking for human assistance? Oh, they're asking now. Every day brings more desperate messages, but according to our standing orders, we're maintaining complete communication silence with all non-human species. After the communication ended, Taemin sat in his office staring out the window at New Sol's skyline. The city looked peaceful, normal, as if the rest of the galaxy wasn't being consumed by an enemy that turned living worlds into something out of a nightmare. Hei Wan was still standing by his desk. Taemin, we have to do something. We can't just watch billions of beings die. The council made their choice, he replied quietly. They decided humanity couldn't be trusted. They voted us out of every agreement, every alliance, every cooperative effort. They wanted us to be silent. So we're just going to let them all die? Taemin was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. Across human space, similar conversations were taking place. Military commanders watched as council fleets were systematically destroyed. Scientists analyzed devourer attack patterns and developed countermeasures that would never be shared. Diplomats filed away increasingly desperate pleas for assistance from species that had spent months calling humans dangerous and unpredictable. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same species that had claimed humans were too aggressive for galactic peace were now begging those same humans to fight a war that the rest of the galaxy couldn't win. In the Luna Base Command Center, Kang Ho was updating the tactical situation for Earth's leadership. The galactic map now showed red zones covering nearly half of the inhabited galaxy. The spread was accelerating as the devourers grew stronger with each consumed system. Current enemy strength? Asked General Park from the Earth Command Center. Conservative. Estimate puts their fleet strength at over 10,000 major vessels, with support craft numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Every system they consume adds to their num. The debates in the Human Colonial Congress had been going on for 3 days straight. In the Great Assembly Hall on Earth, representatives from every human world argued about the most important decision their species had ever faced. They cast us out, shouted Representative Chen from the Kepler colonies, her voice carrying across the packed chamber. They said we were too dangerous, too violent for their precious galactic community. Now they want us to save them? Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the assembly. The anger was understandable. Humanity had spent 3 centuries building relationships with the alien species, only to be excluded when those same aliens decided humans were inconvenient. And what happens if we say no? Countered Representative Singh from New Mumbai. We let billions of innocent beings die because their leaders made a mistake? How does that make us any better than the enemy we're fighting? The argument had been raging since Chancellor Crixon's surrender message had been received. Some humans wanted revenge for the Council's treatment. Others argued for compassion regardless of politics. Still others worried that intervening would cost human lives for beings who had rejected humanity's help when it was offered freely. In the middle of it all sat Prime Minister Jae Sung, the leader of Earth's government and humanity's unofficial spokesperson to the galaxy. He had been listening to the debates without speaking, but everyone knew that his voice would be crucial in the final decision. Prime Minister called out Representative Washington from the Mars colonies. The Council made their position clear. They didn't want humanity involved in galactic affairs. Why should we risk human lives for people who voted to exclude us? Before Jae Sung could answer, the chamber's communications system activated. The image of Admiral Hyunwoo appeared on the main screen, broadcasting from his flagship. Mr. Prime Minister, the Admiral said, I have an urgent report from our humanitarian rescue operations. The chamber fell silent. Most representatives didn't even know that rescue operations had already begun. Report, Admiral, Jae Sung replied. Commander Sung Min has been leading evacuation missions at the edge of the war zone. His reports, I think the Congress needs to see what we're dealing with. The main screen changed to show Commander Sung Min, standing on the bridge of the rescue ship Mercy's Hand. Behind him, the ship's cargo bays were visible, packed with refugees from dozens of different species. Honored representatives, Sung Min began, his voice tired but steady. I'm currently carrying the last 300 survivors of the Cathari species. Their homeworld of 7 billion people was consumed by the devourers 18 hours ago. The chamber was completely quiet now. Many representatives had worked with Cathari diplomats over the years. They were a peaceful species known for their art and poetry. The survivors I'm carrying include children, Mr. Prime Minister. Cathari younglings who watched their parents sacrifice themselves to get these few to safety. They're asking me, why? The humans are helping them when their own leaders voted to exclude us from the galactic community. Seung-min paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. I told them that humans don't abandon innocent people, no matter what their governments do. But I'm not sure I was right. The decision of whether to save these people, to save what's left of galactic civilization, is up to all of you. The transmission ended, leaving the assembly hall in stunned silence. Representative Chen, who had been arguing against intervention just minutes earlier, was the first to speak. How many survivors are we talking about, Prime Minister? Jae-sung activated his personal data tablet. Current estimates suggest that approximately 40% of the galaxy's population has already been consumed. Of the remaining populations, most are trapped in systems that will fall within days. And if we intervene, what are our chances of success? According to our military analysis, Jae-sung replied, we have weapons and tactics that might be effective against the Devourers, but the cost will be enormous. We're talking about deploying every human ship, every human soldier, every human resource in a war that could last years. Representative Kim from the Tau Ceti colonies raised her hand. What about the Council species themselves? Will they fight alongside us, or will we be carrying the entire burden? The answer came from General Park, whose image appeared on a secondary screen. Most Council military forces have been destroyed or scattered. What remains is fragmented and demoralized. If we intervene, we'll be doing most of the fighting ourselves. The debates continued for hours, with representatives arguing about military costs, civilian casualties, and the moral implications of both action and inaction. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge. It was Representative Patel from the Europa colonies who finally voiced what many were thinking. The question isn't whether the Council species deserve our help, she said. The question is whether we can live with ourselves if we let an entire galaxy die out of spite. The final vote was closer than many expected. 847 votes for intervention, 623 votes against, with 112 abstentions. It was enough to authorize military action, but the slim margin showed how divided humanity remained about helping those who had rejected them. Prime Minister Jae-sung stood to address the assembly after the vote was announced. The decision has been made, he said solemnly. Humanity will intervene to save what remains of galactic civilization. But let it be clear, we do this not because we owe the Council species anything, but because it's the right thing to do. Within hours of the vote, the largest military mobilization in human history began. Operation Redemption launched simultaneously across 200 human systems. Every available ship was pressed into service, from massive battle cruisers to small patrol vessels. Merchant ships were converted into troop transports, civilian factories began producing military supplies around the clock, and research facilities that had been developing defensive technologies switched to creating offensive weapons. Admiral Hyun-woo found himself commanding a fleet that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The human armada that assembled at the staging point in the Wolf 359 system numbered over 15,000 ships of all sizes, carrying weapons and technologies that had been developed in complete secrecy. Fleet status report, he requested from his flagship's command center. All task forces report ready for deployment, replied Captain Naun, his chief of staff. Commander Chang-woo's assault fleet is prepared to engage Devourer forces directly. Commander Jun Seo's Tech Warfare Division is ready to deploy electronic countermeasures. Support divisions under Commander Min-ho are prepared for evacuation and humanitarian operations. Hyun-woo studied the tactical displays showing Devourer positions throughout the galaxy. The red zones now covered over 60% of inhabited space, and they were still expanding. Priority target? He asked. Council Prime, replied the fleet intelligence officer. The Devourers have been moving steadily toward the galactic capital. If it falls, any remaining Council resistance will collapse completely. Council Prime was still 3 days away from the approaching Devourer fleet, but the system was already in chaos. Refugee ships from hundreds of worlds crowded the space around the capital planet, carrying the last survivors of species that had existed for millions of years. On the surface of Council Prime itself, the great assembly hall that had once voted to exclude humanity was now filled with the desperate voices of survivors begging for sanctuary. Boram, who had served as humanity's diplomatic representative before the exclusion, had emerged from the safe house where she had been hiding. As one of the few humans on Council Prime when the crisis began, she had spent weeks coordinating with underground resistance movements and helping organize evacuations. "The situation is getting worse by the hour," she reported to Earth via encrypted transmission. "Most of the Council leadership is dead or missing. Chancellor Crixon is trying to maintain some kind of government, but he's essentially operating from a refugee ship." "What about defensive preparations?" asked Ambassador Taman from his command post on New Sol. "What defenses?" Boram replied, bitterly. "Half the Council fleet was destroyed trying to slow down the Devourer advance. The other half is scattered across a dozen different systems, trying to protect their own homeworlds. There's no coordinated defense plan, no unified command structure." She paused, looking out at the chaos in the streets below her position. "Tamian, these people are terrified. They spent months celebrating humanity's exclusion from the Council, and now they're praying that we'll save them. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so tragic." Meanwhile, at the edge of human space, the first direct contact with Devourer forces was about to occur. Commander Minho was leading a humanitarian convoy carrying supplies to refugee camps when his sensors detected something approaching from deep space. The signatures matched the profiles that human intelligence had been tracking for months. "All ships, battle stations," he ordered. "We have incoming Devourer contacts." The creatures that emerged from the darkness were even more horrifying than the intelligence reports had suggested. The smallest ones were the size of human destroyers, covered in organic armor that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The larger vessels looked like living asteroids, their surfaces crawling with smaller organisms. "Sir," reported. "The final battle for the galaxy began at Council Prime, where humanity made its stand against an enemy that had consumed half the known universe." Fleet Marshal Yu Jin stood on the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable Will, watching as the largest fleet in human history took position around the galactic capital. 15,000 human ships formed defensive lines that stretched across the entire system, while behind them, millions of refugee vessels carried the last survivors of hundreds of species. "Enemy contact in T-4 hours, reported the fleet intelligence officer. Devourer fleet strength is estimated at over 20,000 major vessels, supported by countless smaller organisms. Yu Jin nodded grimly. The humans were outnumbered, but they had advantages that no Council species had possessed. Their weapons were designed specifically to fight the Devourers. Their tactics were coordinated across the entire fleet. And most importantly, they were fighting for something more than just survival. They were fighting for the future of galactic civilization. "Signal from Admiral Chang Wu's assault division," announced the communications officer. "All strike forces report ready for engagement." Chang Wu commanded the fast attack vessels that would engage the Devourer fleet directly. His ships were armed with the new plasma cannons that had proven effective in earlier battles, as well as kinetic weapons that could punch through organic armor. "Signal from Commander Nayun's support division," came another report. "Defensive platforms are online and ready. All evacuation routes are clear." The defensive platforms were the key to the entire battle plan. Each one was armed with weapons that could destroy Devourer vessels the size of small moons, powered by reactors that had been built in secret over the past months. But the most important part of the human fleet was Commander Junseo's technological warfare division. His ships carried experimental weapons that attacked the Devourers in ways no Council species had ever attempted, targeting their biological systems directly, disrupting their ability to adapt and evolve. "Fleet status?" Eugen asked. "All divisions report ready for combat," replied his chief of staff. "Human casualties from preliminary engagements have been minimal. Devourer adaptation to our weapons has been slower than projected." That was the crucial factor. The Devourers had adapted quickly to every weapon the Council species had used against them, but human technology was different. Where alien species had focused on energy weapons and defensive systems, humans had developed kinetic weapons, biological warfare, and tactics that the Devourers couldn't easily counter. "Incoming transmission from Council Prime," announced the communications officer. The main screen filled with the image of Chancellor Crixon, but he was no longer the proud leader who had announced humanity's exclusion from the council. His purple skin was pale with exhaustion, and his forearms trembled as he spoke. "Fleet Marshal Yu Jin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "On behalf of what remains of the Galactic Council, I want to thank humanity for coming to our aid. We know we don't deserve your help after what we did to your species." Yu Jin's expression remained neutral. "Chancellor, we're not here because you deserve our help. We're here because it's the right thing to do." The Chancellor nodded, and when he continued, his voice was stronger. "When this is over, if we survive this, things will be different. The council that excluded humanity is gone. What replaces it will be built on the principles of cooperation and respect that we should have embraced from the beginning." Before Yu Jin could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. "Enemy contacts detected," announced the sensor operator. "Devourer fleet emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system." The main display changed to show the tactical situation. What emerged from the darkness of space was beyond horrifying. It was a fleet of living nightmares that stretched across light years of space. The largest vessels looked like organic mountains, their surfaces crawling with smaller creatures. Medium-sized ships resembled predatory sea creatures moving with fluid grace through the vacuum. And surrounding them all were clouds of smaller organisms, each one the size of a human fighter but clearly alive and hostile. "My God," whispered someone on the bridge. Yu Jin's voice cut through the fear. "All ships, this is Fleet Marshal Yu Jin. Today we fight not just for humanity, but for every species that calls this galaxy home. Today we prove that intelligence and courage can triumph over mindless consumption. All divisions, engage at will." The battle that followed would be remembered as the greatest space combat in galactic history. Commander Chang Wu led the first wave of attacks, his assault ships diving into the Devourer formation like hawks attacking a swarm of locusts. The new plasma cannons carved through organic armor that had shrugged off council weapons, sending gouts of alien blood and tissue spinning through space. But the Devourers fought back with terrifying effectiveness. Their bioweapons dissolved human armor. Their living torpedoes tracked human ships across impossible distances, and their largest vessels began spawning new organisms even as they fought. "Casualty report," Yu Jin requested. "Heavy losses in the assault divisions," replied his chief of staff. "But we're inflicting significant damage on the enemy fleet. Commander Chang Wu's tactics are working." On the surface of Council Prime, billions of beings from hundreds of species watched the battle unfold in the skies above their world. Many of them had voted to exclude humanity from the galactic community, but now they prayed to whatever gods they worshipped that the humans would win. In the underground command center where she had been coordinating refugee operations, Boram watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. The human fleet was not just holding its own against the Devourer armada, it was winning. "How is this possible?" asked diplomat Zerthala of the Cathari, one of the few alien officials still on the planet. "No council fleet has ever managed to inflict serious damage on the Devourers." Boram smiled grimly. "Because no council species ever prepared to fight them. You all spent centuries building fleets designed for shows of force and diplomatic intimidation. Humans built a fleet designed for war." The truth was more complex than that, but Boram didn't have time to explain. The humans had spent decades developing weapons and tactics specifically for this enemy, while the council species had dismissed their warnings and ignored their intelligence reports. High above the planet, the battle was reaching its climax. Commander Jun Seo's Technological Warfare Division had deployed their most secret weapons, viruses designed to attack Devourer biological systems directly. The effect was devastating. Entire sections of the enemy fleet began to break down at the cellular level, their organic components consuming themselves. "The enemy is retreating," announced the sensor operator on the Indomitable Will. "Devourer forces are withdrawing from the system." But Yu Jin knew it wasn't over. The largest Devourer vessel, the creature they had designated as the mothership, was still approaching Council Prime. It was the size of a small moon, covered with weapons that could crack planets and spawning chambers that could produce thousands of smaller creatures. All remaining ships focus fire on the mothership, Yujin ordered. This is our chance to end this war. Commander Yeon-su, commanding the heavy battleship Seoul's Pride, led the final assault on the Devourer mothership. Her ship's main cannon, a weapon that fired projectiles at nearly the speed of light, punched through the creature's organic armor like it was tissue paper, but the mothership fought back with desperate fury. Its bioweapons lashed out across space, destroying human ships with every strike. Its spawn chambers released clouds of smaller creatures that swarmed the human fleet like angry insects. The battle for the mothership lasted for 6 hours, with human ships making run after run against the massive creature. Hundreds of human vessels were destroyed, thousands of human lives were lost, but gradually the mothership began to weaken. The final blow came when Yeon-su's Seoul's Pride rammed directly into the creature's central mass, detonating its entire arsenal in a burst of light that could be seen across the system. The explosion tore the mothership apart, sending fragments of its organic structure spinning through space. With the death of the mothership, the remaining Devourer forces began to retreat. The smaller creatures that had been spawned from the larger vessels suddenly became uncoordinated, fleeing in random directions. The few surviving major vessels turned away from Council Prime and disappeared into hyperspace. The war was over. Humanity had won. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and medical teams treated the wounded, the full scope of what had happened began to become clear. Commander Gi-hun, leading the relief efforts, reported that human casualties had been significant but not catastrophic. Nearly 2,000 ships had been lost, and over 50,000 human personnel had died in the fighting. But they had saved the galaxy. Dr. Hyo-jung, analyzing the biological samples recovered from destroyed Devourer vessels, made a startling discovery. The creatures weren't truly alien. They were artificial creations, biological weapons designed by some unknown species millions of years ago. They had been consuming galaxies for eons, but they had finally met their match in humanity's combination of technology and determination. 3 days after the battle, the surviving leaders of